Comes from 1 Corinthians in the 9th chapter. We will be reading verses 19 to 23. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. If you recall from last week, we looked at the rich man and Lazarus. And we saw just how much we've been blessed, abundantly blessed, richly blessed with God's love, with God's grace, with His Spirit. And we have a real opportunity to minister to the Lazaruses around us, those who are among us at our gates, in our community, to show them the same compassion and love that God shows us. And so how do we go about doing that? What's the first step in reaching out to our community and sharing the love of God with those around us, wherever that might be? And for some of us, that may begin right in our very homes, with our husbands or wives or our children or grandchildren. Well, Paul's going to give us some insight into that here in the 9th chapter of his letter to the Corinthians, and we're going to begin reading in verse 19. He says, "Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I become like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all of this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." This is the word of the Lord for us today. Well, today we examine Paul's ministry. We see how Paul relied on building relationships in the communities that he ministered. And those relationships were built in a number of ways, but the foundation of those relationships were built on trust. They were built by first seeking the commonalities that he had with among those that he was seeking to minister to, that he was seeking to bring Christ to. You know, we hear the word evangelism, or we think about witnessing, we think about words like lost souls and those kinds of things, and those are scary kind of words for many people, aren't they? But I want you to think of those kind of things, those kind of concepts and those words as big picture words. And today we're going to look at little pictures, little baby step kind of things, okay? We're not going to save the entire world today in this message, in this sitting. So put that out of your mind. But the problem is, many folks think that I can't save the world, so why even bother? Why even try? The truth of the matter is, we can't save a single soul. I can't save anybody. The only one who can save is Christ. It is simply our job to tell others about the one who can save, about what He has done for us. And so we begin doing that by telling just one person, maybe two, building one relationship, maybe two, building a relationship with one group in this area or that. And let the Lord work through those relationships to reach the hearts of those we seek to minister to. Paul understood this, you see. And this is what he means when he says, I seek to make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible, so that to the Jew I become like a Jew, to win the Jews. Now, what does he mean by that? Wasn't Paul a Jew? Yes, he was. So why would he say, I have to become like a Jew? He was born a Jew, raised a Jew. He knew the Jewish ways and customs. But you see, what he's saying here is if that's what I have to do to relate to people, if that's what I have to build on, rely upon, then that's what I'm going to pull out. That's the things I'm going to build on to build a relationship with them. I'm going to talk about my lineage. I'm going to talk about how I was born and raised from the line of Benjamin. I'm going to talk about Father Abraham with them. I'm going to talk about the festivals and feasts. I'm going to talk about sitting at my father's feet, listening to, as a boy, hearing about the stories of Passover. I'm going to talk about hearing that story of Passover, but then you see, I'm going to relate how hearing that story of the blood's lamb that was that lamb's blood that was shed and applied to the doorpost as a covering for the people. I'm going to take that and apply it to then Christ, whose blood was shed for all people, and he became our Passover lamb. You see, he took that story and applied it to Christ. To those who were caught up in the law, he says, I'm free from the law, but I understand you. I know where you're coming from, because you see, I was once just as zealous as you were about keeping the law. Heck, I probably got you beat. I was so caught up in the law that I went about persecuting people, rounding them up. But you see, one day the Lord got a hold of me and showed me a much better way. To the Gentiles, or as he refers to them here, to those not having the law, he became like one of them. He could talk philosophy. He could talk morality. He could talk about the freedom to worship, to do what you wanted, when you wanted. And he could build off of that, you see. We've been talking in our study of Acts about Paul and his journeys, but you remember one day he was in Athens and he saw all these idols to all these different gods, and they had this one called to the unknown God. And he took that and he related it and he said, you worship this as the unknown God, but let me tell you and let me make the unknown God known to you. And he told him about the God of the universe, the creator God, the one true God. Now some folks take this verse here as one not having the law, and I became just like them not having the law. And they'll stretch that, and they'll make that an excuse to live a deplorable life. And just say, well, I'm just trying to witness to those. I'm trying to reach those lost souls. But let me tell you, getting sloppy drunk with the boys on Friday night and saying that you're doing that to try to witness to them and to tell them about Jesus is not much witness at all. That is no excuse, and that's not what Paul is saying here. That's not what he's saying when he says, I became like one not having the law. In fact, he says, I used some restraint in this. In verse 21, he says, I'm not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law. Well, what is Christ's law? Over and over again, Jesus commanded us to do what? To love one another, to love God first, and then to love one another. And those are the bounds in which we work. Remembering that we do all of this first and foremost out of our love for God, that we love Him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then we love our neighbors as ourselves. But in all of this, you see, Paul is trying to take on the point of view of those he's trying to reach, to minister to. So for the Jew that is constrained by the law, that's bound up in him, that's where his identity is, and though he himself has discovered freedom from that, he restrains himself. He doesn't do certain things so as not to offend them or look down upon them. because he knows that that's where their identity is. For those who have never heard of such things as a law, he understands that, yet he tries to point them to a better way. He gets on the same level as those he's seeking to minister to, and we can do the same thing. Find out the interests of those we're trying to seek out, to minister to. Paul encourages us to do that in Philippians. In chapter 2, and beginning in verse 3, he says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. And your attitude should be the same as that of Christ, who being in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant." You see, we can take that very nature as well. Take the heart of a servant, the attitude of a servant. But we have to be real about it. Folks know when you're faking interest, don't they? So be real with them. You don't have to be something that you're not. And we can admit our shortfalls and our weaknesses. Paul says, "To the weak I became weak, so as to win the weak." He tells us, I've got this thorn in my flesh. I prayed to God to let me get over it, to take it away from me. But he said, I'm gonna use you in your weakness, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So Paul tells about his weaknesses, about his struggles, not to say anything about himself, but to glorify God. We don't have to cover up our shortfalls, our shortcomings, our weaknesses, but we can use them to identify with folks. In all of this, he says, "I become all things to all men, so that by all means possible, somebody might be saved." So what do we have to do to reach the lost? You know, I can stand here in this robe, and I can share the gospel with you, and it'll be received here in this church, won't it? For some of you anyway. But sometimes when folks come into a church and they see a minister in a robe, they think, "Boy, look at that guy. He sure thinks a lot of himself, doesn't he? Putting himself all hoity-toity above everybody else. Who does he think he is?" If you walk into some churches in a robe like this, they'll run you right back out. Ministers don't do that. Even here in this community, if I were to walk out of these doors wearing this robe, would I be received? It works fine within these walls, but to go outside of these doors and try to approach somebody, what do you think would happen? Would they listen at all? Probably not. So in order to effectively minister, I may have to lose something. I may have to take this off. That feels a little better anyway, I got to be honest with you. That's pretty hot. Now, this is probably more like what a minister looks like in your mind anyway, right? Suit and tie. Yeah. And I can go into the hospitals or into the community and feel like a minister, and this is what your minister looks like, and people will seek out those in the suit and tie, and that's what they can identify with, right? But even in the coat, it'll only get you so far. And people will start to, I'm not gonna talk to that guy. I don't feel comfortable talking with somebody like that. They've been to school. They're up here, and I'm down here, and I'm not really gonna do that. So I might have to lose the coat also. And the tie, well, it's nice, but it really probably only works around business folks, right? In the business community. If I go to a football game on Friday night and wear a tie, I'm pretty out of place, aren't I? Go down to First Friday, you don't see many people walking around in ties. So unless it's a big fundraiser event for some big community thing where you're expected to be dressed up, probably the tie is not going to get me very far, is it? So I might need to lose the tie. But I want you to notice I wore my UK tie today. Isn't that pretty? That's a good color blue, isn't it? And it looks good, doesn't it? Let me unbutton this. Woo. It's hot up here. I'm from Kentucky. In fact, hang on just a minute. There we go. Now I feel a little better. In Kentucky, the kids are born with basketballs in their hands. I want you to look down at your veins right quick. That's not red in there, that's blue, isn't it? We got blue blood. That's who I am. I'm a Kentucky man. But sometimes, when I came down here for a trial sermon, I wasn't even hired for the job yet and was already told, you're going to have to choose. We don't care who you choose, but you're going to have to pick one or the other. Auburn or Alabama. Pick one. We don't care which one, but pick one. There's no fence riding. You can keep your blue during basketball season. That's okay. But you better pick one because we play football down here, son. And so when the Lord called us to the land of Alabama, it just so happened that the day we moved down here, one certain team was playing for a national championship. And so if I have to buy an Alabama shirt so that my ministry might be effective, well then roll tide. But you see, I can still keep my UK hat, right? Because that's who I am. I can still keep my identity. Because it's part of me. It's in me. But now, I want you Alabama fans to know and to see and to realize the whole point of this sermon is that sometimes we may have to do things to minister to folks, to reach folks that you might not like or you might not want to do. But you realize that they're in the best interests of things to advance your cause. And so sometimes to effectively reach folks, we may have to say War Eagle too, right? Now don't worry, I'm done taking things off, okay? We've had a little fun this morning. But what are the activities in your community? What are the events or the areas that you can get involved in, that you can provide an easy way or an easy access to get the gospel message? What's going on in your neighborhood already that you can just jump right into? Maybe in your neighborhood, folks like to, maybe they like to garden. You like to garden, raise a garden, plant flower beds or what have you? Get out there and get your hands dirty. Get out there with them. Maybe in your neighborhood, what is it? Maybe you see a lot of folks out there running, walking. Maybe they're out there every day. People running right by your house. Maybe it's time that you get your sneakers out and lace them up. Get out there right with them. Strike up a conversation. I don't know, maybe Maybe it's time that I have to pull out, maybe I need to pull out my camo, my hunting, my gun, my fishing gear. Maybe I need to learn how to do something like that. Maybe I need to pull out my golf clubs just so I can open up a line of communication with somebody that maybe they hadn't been going to church in a while, or maybe that's what their interest is. So maybe that's how I can get involved with them so that they'll listen to me. They'll see that I'm not some hoity-toity preacher in a robe all the time, but I'm a real person too. Maybe I need to learn how to maybe I'll need to learn how to cook so I can get involved with a different aspect of the church or the community. We got a community Thanksgiving meal coming up here that feeds over 4,000 people in this city. Did you know that? It's a great way for us to get involved, get our hands dirty, serving the people in this city. And it's not just on Thanksgiving, work's already being done for it. I can put on an apron and go out there and serve meals. I can go out there the day before and chop up turkey or vegetables or whatever they need me to do. I can serve meals at the Way of the Cross every day during the week, year-round. What is it that you need to learn to do? I can learn how to sew, to make something for somebody. A prayer blanket. What is it? What else have I got over here? Maybe I need to pull out my tool belt and join in a project to reconstruct a home that's been damaged, or maybe get out my rake and go help my neighbor clean up their yard because they're getting on up there in age and they can't do the things that they used to be able to do. What's going on in your community, in your neighborhood, that you need to get involved with? Let's see if that'll hang up there without spilling everywhere. That's been through the ringer a time or two. Do I need to learn more about another culture? Do I need to start learning another language? Do I need to learn more about another religion? Not so that I can conform to it, but so that I can use it to point somebody to Christ, to the true Savior of the world. Folks, we're here in a great location. We've got great facilities. We've got great people in this church. But do those things make a great church? Not if we never leave the confines of our great facility. Not if we never share our great people with people outside these four walls. Not if we never bring others into the fellowship with us. Share God's grace with others. Are we as a church glorifying God by sharing His love with those around us? Are we doing all we can for the sake of the gospel so that some might be saved? That's what Paul's encouraging us to do. That's what the Lazaruses at our gates need us to do. All that we can so that some might be saved. Notice he doesn't say so that all are going to be saved. He makes no illusions that he's going to reach every single person. It's just not going to happen. Some people are so hard-hearted, they're just not going to bow their knee before the Lord. But guess what? We don't have to worry about that. That's between them and God. We've been asked to share God's love. That's all we're asked to do. Are we doing it? as we sing our closing hymn this morning. If you're here this morning and you're burdened, you got one person on your heart that you know you need to begin ministering to, reaching out to. You're not sure quite how to do that. I invite you to come lay it before the Lord. Ask Him to show it to you today. How to effectively begin ministering to that one person, that one group, wherever it is in your home, your community. Let's lay it at the Lord's feet. I can't solve it for you, but God can.